Recording is starting. There we go. All righty. So, yeah, please add yourselves to the meeting. I think the cool thing is if you basically put like at whatever your name, it does that cool little thing I just learned. And then start typing. Yeah, try it. I don't know, maybe. Yeah. All right, yeah. So happy New Year one more time for everybody. And now we all get a chance to spend a few moments to try to remember what the heck we were doing at the end of last year, where we left off. Always fun times this time of year. So I unfortunately I was traveling the last meeting we had. I did watch the meeting, and it looks like there were some decisions made regarding the API shape. Not everything. But it seems like there is still some, where we kind of left it was there will be some more discussions about the API shape. So, does anybody have any particular items they want to go ahead and discuss, or are there particular items that were left over? I didn't see any to-dos or decisions, or I saw a bunch of decisions that were made. What I didn't see was action items that we needed to be following up on this meeting. So if somebody has anything they want to go ahead and bring up, I think that would be a good time to do that.
VMware has updated our pull request to
Okay,
include some of what was discussed last week. We took it as an action item, even if it wasn't discussed or
got it.
written down. Yeah.
Discussion. I assume I don't have the link handy, but I would assume it would be here somewhere. Okay, I will add a link to it.
Oh, thank you. Oh, and Kavitha's corrected me. Actually, we've updated code, but not the pull request. We want to make sure that that goes in, since that pull request is really good.
Yeah, we will make the pull request and we'll update the link here.
Yeah.
Oh,
You can
wait,
probably
that's
tag
awesome.
us.
So I can Teflon this to one of you, huh?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
definitely.
Krishnan ka.
Uh,
Yeah.
Krishnan,
uh,
Krishnan.
okay, well, I
Well,
will.
I can tag myself.
Yeah, you doing everything. This is great. I love this. Not me. Um,
Yes, one question for everyone. I know we talked about a lot of the requirements we want to kind of move towards an SDK type model. Would it make sense to capture somewhere the different design layers? Because seems like we want, the lowest layer, or I guess depending on your point of view, the highest layer would be the Cosine SDK. Then we have clients like the CLI and Cosigned as the webhook, and then perhaps other clients which are also introducing different policies, things like that. So at least in my mind, I keep kind of trying to paint this mental picture, and I'm still trying to figure out what exactly goes into what layer. But would it make sense to start a document and just capture this somewhere for our reference, as well as others who would be working on this later?
I don't see why not. I'm hesitant to get pulled into the SDK discussion too greatly. Rather, I kind of feel like the clients are expressions of requirements for the SDK. So maybe I'm missing something, but we are finding in our own exploration areas where the CLI itself doesn't
Right.
have the features exactly that we need. But how that ties into the SDK discussion, maybe I'm sorry, Jim. Maybe that's your point. Is that where we want to capture what those missing features are?
Right, because one of the things we talked about is we want the CLI as well as the native webhook to at least have all of the features, but at the same time, I think that will help us decide what goes where, right? Like, for example, should the CRD belong directly in Cosine, or should it be in the admission control layer? Things like that. And, should we kind of create what types should be defined at what layer is an interesting discussion, right? Because there's also requirements like we want to support perhaps the flexibility of languages like QLang and even Rego or other types as higher level abstractions, which can express different policy rules. Um, so to me, that seems like the maybe the third layer if you're kind of starting with cosine as the the lowest or the most stable layer, right? Um,
Yeah. So I just want to make sure. I'm going to say what I think I heard from both of you all. Um, we need to go ahead and make sure that whatever is in the SDK is sufficient enough to go and support both the CLI as well as the cosigned as the webhook. We have already identified some shortcomings in the SDK that cannot be um, uh, that basically makes it so that we can't implement some CLI features or cosigned features because the cosigned SDK is missing something. So some of the requirements have been coming up already, and we need to go and formalize those. Is that fair for the first point?
I think so, and I think there's requirements at different layers, which might help perhaps parallelize or help us work at different layers of abstraction. Like one of the things we have talked about a few times is how do we start supporting more flexible signature sets or verifiers, things like that, right? So where does that go?
Yeah. I just wanted to go and get the first point here because I do think there's a couple
Right.
of different things. So if we think about the layers, which is like, I think at the bottom level, we have the SDK, right? So if this is, well, there's always something else underneath. But for our discussion, I think this is the lowest level, the cosine SDK, right? That everything builds on top of that. Is that fair?
Right.
Right. And then we have two layers above it. One of them is the robot, if you will, the cosigned, and the other one is the CLI. And both of those have some requirements that currently are not met by the cosigned SDK.
Correct.
So,
And then there's other policy engines like Kyverno, Gatekeeper, etc., which layer above these as well, right? So
yes, sorry, I was trying to go and get to a checkpoint. Like, okay, well now we are here. Like,
right,
okay, now we know that's the step one, which is that we need to. This is the first thing we need to do for the CLI, and then now we go ahead and go the next layer. I didn't quite get into it yet, but we just did. Okay, cool. Now that we have this uh checkpoint there, which is now we are good with the cosine as the webhook and whatever the SDK does. Then the question is, I think, will some of those policy engine decisions, will they be bleeding through down to cosine SDK, which would
right.
add additional requirements, or would that be a proper layering? Because I'm trying to see if if there's a third thing that is going to bleed into the cosine SDK, right? Because it'd be nice if we didn't have to bleed those, meaning that those would be above. Do you see what
Right.
I mean? And I don't know.
Absolutely. So the question becomes, does the SDK, so I guess you could always reverse the model, right? You could have a plugin model or you could have a kind of a push down model. So some of these requirements I feel will dictate how we design that SDK to say, are we pulling up data into these higher layers and then making decisions there? Or are we pushing down the declaration of what we want and letting the SDK decide, right? So it's kind of like I guess, just in framework design, right? Whether which style do we want to support, and both are valid. It's just a matter of what gives us the most flexibility.
Yeah, I think there's kind of the flexibility is always good to keep in mind. I'm also trying to think about how do we want to make sure that if folks want to introduce these plugins and everything else, that we can make sure it doesn't bleed through all the layers. Thinking about as the implementer, if I'm implementing something like, let's say I write my own policy engine, or
Right.
step one, invent a new language, and I start going down that, like how many layers do I need to touch?
Right. Now that's a valid point, right? And there are different approaches there again. So we could say, like, look, we can be opinionated and say that this is the language we're going to use, or this is the type system we define, and everything that wants to leverage the SDK has to translate to it. Or you could again allow plugins where you're allowing higher levels of policy engines to just pull up data and make their own decisions, right? But again, it's a matter of maybe working through. So perhaps as a seems like as maybe a good next step, if everyone agrees, would be to we can start a document and just draw these up and try and see what fits where, and at least put a few lines of what we expect in each layer, and it may be easier to move things around in a design document, and of course we can prototype this as we're doing that as well.
Because it sort of kind of seems like and again, just saying what I think I heard you say. So we could certainly, like in the layering model, if we had a proper, traditional layering model, both Cosigned and CLI should be able to ask Cosigned SDK just as a one model in the pull model, right? Give me all the data about this particular image, right?
Correct.
And then the next layer would say like, okay, cool. Now I have this, and then you go and turn the crank and run your policy engine, and out comes the answer.
Exactly.
Right.
And
second,
now,
sorry. And
go ahead.
The second model would be that you basically go ahead and push all those decisions down into the SDK, where you say like, well, am I good? Is this container good? And my gut reaction would be for the layering model, the first one would be probably, this is a knee jerk. I haven't thought about much, but that seems more flexible.
Right. I agree.
Which sounds more flexible? I'm sorry.
The more flexible would be where, again, this is just a knee jerk, so I don't want to go in. It's just the ability for both Cosigned and CLI or whatever else might come down the line would be to go ahead and ask Cosigned the equine question of, hey, I have this container image, give me all the data about it.
Right.
Yeah. So I tend to agree, because I think at a certain point the CLI is going to be a little more linear, right, in its usage. But when it comes to the admission controller, not to labor the point, but when it comes to the admission controller, that's where cluster operators are going to require. I mean, that's why we're here, right? This discussion of policy definition. It's where we're going to require the most, where the decision making is very appropriate in the admission controller.
Yeah, the only one question that kind of lingers for me with that model, with that pull-up model, is there any sort of risk now where so the Cosigned SDK is then not making any decisions, right? Is there some basic decision it needs to make to guarantee that at least we're verifying things correctly? Or do we leave it up to the higher layers to do that? And really, I don't see how we can achieve both, because today it's a closed sort of model where Cosigned will decide, whether something's valid or not, and you trust it that that code is doing the right thing, and you basically get an allow or deny, right? Now we are deferring that decision to other implementers, which introduces some risk, but also adds the flexibility.
Well, I wonder if we can draw that line, because valid from a cryptographic point of view is pretty binary, and unless I'm misunderstanding something. So it seems pretty binary to me. So to say that, let's take a more complex example, a keyless example. Boy, it sure would be great if I didn't have to interpret a whole lot, right? Because of the extra complexity there that as a cluster operator, I might not grok. So if it can tell me good, bad, but the decision making is still in my hands, as the policy writer for the admission controller.
Yeah, so exactly what you said there kind of resonated with me, which is the cryptographic. So what I was kind of again, these are just quick thoughts, is the Cosigned SDK would be able to go and say, okay, look, I have done the validation for that. Here's all the signatures and attestations, and they are valid. I know these to be true. And then the higher level would basically be able to go and rely on the fact that it wouldn't have to do again things like, well, do I have this? So I guess what I would think is at the higher level, the decision engine or the policy engine would say like, well, it needs to have, I'm just making things up, like it needs to have an SBOM and needs to have a scan, and it needs to have, you know, N out of M reviewers in the fullness of time for this code to run. And those kinds of things I think would be at the higher level, because I think in the fullness of time, that's where very complex decisions will be need to be done. Is that what you were saying? Sorry, did I make sure that was Adam, right? Sorry, I can't see who was.
Yeah.
Is that what you were trying to roughly say?
Yes, sir. I believe so.
Okay.
So
Kavita, you had
my
a-
question, yeah. So my question was, you are still going to validate the signature, but will not say, hey, should this be allowed or not from the Cosigned SDK. You're going to say, hey, you gave me this image. I found these many valid signatures, these many invalid signatures, these many valid attestations, and these many invalid attestations, or SBOM or whatever we are talking about. And then give all of this data to the policy enforcer. And then the policy enforcer, depending on what policy we design, will say, oh, I want like 5 valid signatures and 5 valid attestations, and only then I would let this through. Is this what the cut we are making?
I think so. I think that's sort of kind of the mental model that I was thinking would allow the flexibility and go ahead and keep the Cosigned SDK as very sort of kind of roles and responsibilities, right? Which is, it would basically just go and validate up to that point, and you know, I report, you decide. This is what I know, and these are true things, and you decide what you want to do with that information.
So now this feels like we are feeding into how the SDK should look like. So does this not take away from the focus of this task force or working group?
Wasn't that the focus, or maybe I misunderstood? I thought that that's what we were trying to define as this API.
So now there are two different things. As you're trying to define how the policy is going to look like for the webhook, and then you're also trying to define what the SDK should give you as an output. So it feels like it is now encompassing more than just the policy. So this, I don't know if we want more consensus. So I don't know what the SDK design process is looking like, because I don't know if there's a working group for it or if I'm involved there. So is it okay if we also define what the SDK is going to look like and give there? But now that is too much for this task working group to do.
Well, so being the primary clients of the SDK, it seems like, yeah, one feeds the other, right? Almost.
Yeah, I sorry, I was just scrolling there a little bit. I just wanted to make sure that I'm not like, or we are not, and me in particular, opening up things that have already been decided, right? It's always fun to chit chat, but I just want to make sure that if something was decided in the past, that we are not going in and going like reopening those wounds, so to speak.
Got it. So now, we are going to write down, I guess, what we are expecting from the SDK, but need not necessarily make decisions. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, so I guess I'm just like, here's the API shape, right? So this API shape was focused on cosigned, but
entirely, yeah.
Right. So I think this still sort of kind of jives with that, because this is basically driving they're basically saying, okay, we are defining, and somebody correct, jump in, please be vocal. But these would be the ones that would be driving the behavior of the cosigned webhook. And I think the only thing we are talking about is where is the boundary here, in the sense that I could certainly see that it's cosigned here. Sorry, scrolling, I'm pointing, you can't see me, what I just looked up below, which would basically be taken the configuration as provided for a cluster, and upon invocation, when a container needs to be checked, I think we are just now maybe talking about how the boundary between that and the cosigned SDK would look like. So I'm not entirely sure that we are in the weeds yet, but maybe we are.
So my thinking is, if we're kind of looking at this again as a set of stable abstractions to build on, I don't see how we can define the cosigned API or the policy without stabilizing the SDK, because whatever we do at that top layer may change later if we then go and redo the SDK, right? So it just seems like if we agree those are the right layers, which would be step one, and I think we're more or less in consensus there, then we can start from the most stable layer, see what the inputs, outputs look like, what abstractions it provides, and then design upwards from there.
Does that answer your? Yeah, yes, but I want to make sure the question gets answered. So, Kavitha, is that?
Yes, yes.
Is that bringing more clarity or more confusion?
Yes. No, it is clear. So I guess now I understand the reason for creating a design document and writing down what we think we need from the SDK, and then building our policy CRT based off of it, which will then change how the cosigned webhook makes decisions.
Yeah, because I think even if we do the we basically said, like, there's a couple of ways we could do this. I'm sure there's others, but let's go and say one of them is basically where we have a cosigned SDK API that allows us to ask questions about a particular image, that it basically says, here's an image, give me all the data you know about it. And it will get back, this is the point one here, and it'll get back cryptographically verified information that it can then go and make decisions on. In the second one, we are basically saying we need cosigned SDK to go and say, all right, here's an image, give me yes or no, or maybe.
Right.
I don't know. And I think that in both of these cases, it will drive requirements into the SDK here, right? And I think that's what we are sort of kind of thinking about the design document, as far as if we were to go ahead and jot down both of these, if we wanted to, or if we basically all agree that we might want to do this or this, then we could focus it on that, and then just put in an alternatives considered section that we decided we are not going to do this because of X, right, Y, and Z, and this is what we are doing. So maybe that would be the next step forward, if we can kind of decide. Not obviously we are not making, we can revisit this if we decide that, oh snap, that was the wrong door, close it quick, go back.
Yep.
But do we think we have a consensus for one of these approaches that we might want to go ahead and investigate more, instead of, like, we are all busy folks, so if we wanted to go and say, okay, well, we think this is the right approach, let's go ahead and jot down some things about that, and then make sure that it makes sense once we put more words on the paper, rather than just chit-chatting about it on a Friday morning after New Year's.
I think I'd like to see, at least from my own desires, I'd like to focus on how we express policy decisions, and make sure that those needs are then filtered into the SDK discussion. I don't know that I can join the SDK working group. You know what I mean? So
yeah.
So I think that's kind of where we're coming from. For this discussion, if we could, let's focus on the kinds of decisions we want to focus on, and what we need to ask of the SDK to arrive at those.
Yeah. So does anyone know, is there a separate SDK working group? I thought we were
Yeah, I
in.
didn't know.
Right?
Well, so at the top of the meeting, I feel like I'm laboring the point, so forgive me. I'm embarrassed, but I believed this was around policy discussion, and so it's the
Okay.
co-signed the admission controller, and and policy descriptions for that admission
Right.
controller. Yeah.
Yeah, I think
Um,
I think everybody's right as usual. I think the pedantic point, however, that we need to keep in mind, I think, is that somebody at some point needs to implement some of this as well.
Right.
yeah.
So whether we want to or not,
Mike,
we will need to go ahead and ensure that whatever we dream up at the highest level is going to be supported cleanly by the lower levels.
well said.
So I think at that point, it might behoove us to go ahead and like at this, I believe we can still go ahead and pursue this in a sense that if we were to go and say, we think this is how it's going to, keeping that implementation in mind, which is that we choose either the pull model or if we do this, the second one, in both of these cases, we need to push things into the Cosigned SDK. And I guess I would argue, I'm not going to argue. My gut feeling that is that this will be a better abstraction, because if we push all of these into it, that means we are going to be more involved in here about defining the plugin models
Right.
and everything else like that. So I think this I'm leaning towards this being maybe a little easier way for both of us to go, easier to implement in parallel, I guess I would say.
Right.
There.
Yeah, with the nuance that, I think both you and Adam just highlighted, that all cryptographic decisions are still made in Cosine itself, right? And not bubbled up.
That was my, again, this is just, these are quick thoughts while we are going through this, but yeah, that would be my that I know that's what Adam said, and that resonates with me as well.
Right.
So I am curious though what other folks think, because this is not the first or last time I make poor decisions in my life.
Yeah, I like that. And not you making bad decisions, but the point that
Ah,
we're taking the first
I
time.
just pulled you all in with me. uh, I
Yeah, I
see
like the
Michael
idea
joined.
too. Like the OPA, just let the OPA get the result and then make their own decision. Just like SDK provide all the information and then let the OPA like make the decision. What do we need to do?
Yeah, is that I saw Michael join maybe, or just put their name down and.
Oh no, I'm here. I joined a little late. My last meeting was running a little late.
No worries.
Yeah.
Any thoughts on some of these discussions? What are your thoughts? I want to make sure we hear from everybody here, so it's not just a.
Yeah, so I haven't gotten super deep into some of it. I mean, so far everything that's written down makes sense. Yeah, I don't really have much in the way. I'm sure once we kind of get a little bit more into it, and I might have some more opinions. But so far, everything that folks have brought up all sounds pretty reasonable.
Okay. Do we feel like as a group then let's go ahead and see if we can make a decision. If we can't, then we can't. But or find out if we need more information. Is there anybody who thinks that the poll model is the worst thing ever? The one highlighted here.
No.
Okay. Do folks have a preference? So this is not the worst. Is this the worst decision ever?
I have a feeling that will be hard to maintain in the long run.
Right.
I think so too. So can we then as a group just decide we are going to go ahead and as the next steps, go ahead and assume that Cosigned SDK will basically have this the question model where we can say, given an image, give me all the data about it, cryptographically verified, and then, again, I report, you decide, right? So Cosigned just says, here's all the stuff, up to you what you want to do with that. And then we go ahead and think about, if we were to go again, if we were to go and start defining some of these policies here, would that be implementable? Like, what would that API then? What would we need from Cosigned SDK? And
Right.
not go in and necessarily implement it, but just kind of like, okay, well, assuming I need a call like this is the call I would make. What would I get back, for example? And then we can go ahead and start that discussion with the SDK folks. Like, well, that's a pipe dream, never gonna happen. Or like, yeah, okay, we can do that.
Yeah, agreed. And I think we are, some of the things we've discussed is where from Kyverno and perhaps even from other policy engines like OPA, and we are at a point where we're seeing some of the limitations with the current model. So we very much would like that flexibility in the SDK. So certainly whatever we can do to help, define and implement that, that would be great.
Okay, is it? I'm gonna. Okay, look at my hands go.
So one question I have, and I get that this is probably like more of a longer term sort of question, because it's something that's started to come up a little bit, not a huge deal for on my end yet. One of the things that I think has been brought up is does it also make sense when it comes to some of the attestations and whatnot to look at things outside of images? Like from an emission control perspective, if the emission control is just like, hey, I'm spinning up something that is an image, that's very easy to sort of do in this sort of model. And that's kind of, but I know some folks have started to kind of look at things like, hey, I'm not going to use, as an example, I'm not going to use a Tecton task that I want to deploy unless that Tecton task has been signed off by certain parties. And you can use, Cosigned to attest to sort of anything you really want. So I was just curious if folks had sort of looked, even just sort of explored that as a potential thing to look at in the future.
I think that, so my feeling is that you're absolutely right, that we are kind of in this, it's early in the game. And I think that we may or may not even know all the questions that we want to ask in the fullness of time. And I think that, I guess that would even push me more towards this one, because then the policy engine would not only ask Cosigned, but it would also ask some additional bits of information, right? So then as the policy gets more complex, it would make more sense that Cosigned may be just one part where you ask for this information.
Correct.
Or maybe I misunderstood what you're saying, but I think that as the policy gets more complex, Cosigned is just one bit of it. There might be additional bits of information you need to gather. So if we wanted to go and implement this with the keen eye on the future, then layering it just like this would make it more easy to later implement it at the Cosigned layer, because the Cosigned is just one bit of information that it gets. Did I misunderstand you?
Yeah, that's totally correct. And I just was, I think you stated it really well there. Yeah, it's first off, agree, very early in the game. And I think the approach that it seems like we're more or less taking here doesn't stop us from eventually sort of supporting those use cases.
Yeah. Okay, good. For once, I was able to summarize something. Yay. Okay, so if we were to do that, then it seems like that is just another data point to go and say the first model is correct. Well, sorry, not correct. It is probably the a better model to move forward, and it'll allow us more flexibility later down the line without pushing more and more complexity. So we don't want to turn Cosigned into Emacs, right? Or maybe we do, the SDK. So if we were to go and have clear role and responsibility for that, it gives you all the attestation signatures and everything else. If you and your organization wants additional information, that belongs at the higher level, and Cosigned is just Cosigned SDK is just one bit of that information. So
Right. Okay. Yeah, so certainly happy to help, with putting this into a document. If either if someone wants to start, or if I can also take that action and just start something and capture and then share.
yeah. Okay, can you add your, sorry, would you mind adding, I'm gonna go and assign, I'm
Sure.
gonna Teflon this right to you then, and you can go ahead and pull in the right folks into that. I don't understand why the maybe it's an @ I need to use for the meetings, but I don't know why it's not picking up you or Kavitha or whatever, because you're part of the meeting. So great.
Okay.
I'll bold this maybe. Okay,
Cool. Thanks, Jim.
yes. And I will just jot down what I think I heard from this one.
Well, thanks, Michael. Now I'm worried about what kind of weird state I'd put Tecton in by refusing the pods that a task brings up using my admission controller without also refusing tasks from being pulled in. So there went my weekend.
Oh yeah, no. I have definitely, while testing some of this sort of stuff out, inadvertently, I think, yeah, it's like I inadvertently clobbered Tecton itself from being able to run. And I think even at some point, I don't remember which, I was testing out both Kyverno, Gatekeeper, and a few other admission controllers. And I think I had set it up such that every admission controller was trying to block the others from running.
All right. Do we have anything else we want to talk about, or do we feel like we made a decision? We had a good discussion. Everybody seems to be sort of kind of on board with this one. We have a path forward. Are there any other questions, concerns, or comments, or do folks want 19 minutes of their life back?
Yeah, so not on this topic, but just a sidebar, which might be interesting to folks working on Cosigned. So there is work going on in SIG security to come up with the admission controller threat model. Let me actually put that in chat, which if I can find the chat.
Is this building on the existing threat model, or is that threat model not as mature as I thought it was?
Yeah, interestingly, there was none defined in like prior projects, right? So this is something that came up as we were reviewing the Kyverno security model, and then eventually read in, it kind of made sense to just spin out, and Rory from Aqua Security and a few others have been kind of working on defining this. So it may be good to make sure if there's any inputs we have, if you're looking at building, production ready admission controllers, or just, in general, and to make sure that we can also abide by some of the recommendations there.
Okay, so we just want to make sure that we are aware of this work ongoing so that we don't make any choices, decisions, or anything that is going to be in direct violation of the recommendations that they are making in this document.
Right, or now, yeah, so now's a good time to also give inputs,
yeah.
right? Because it's in progress, work in progress, and we can help shape it. Yeah, I put the link into chat. And if you're in the, I think it's SIG security docs on the Kubernetes workspace, is where these discussions are ongoing.
Great. Perfect. Anybody else? Well, I'm going to stop the recording then. You all had your chance. You blew it. Here we go.